The trade routes connecting continents are facing unprecedented crises. Ships are rerouting due to unexpected disruptions, traffic jams take weeks to clear, and product prices are soaring worldwide. The impact is real, unfolding now, and directly affecting the global economy. On one side, there's the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, a strategic passage between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden that connects Europe and Asia to the Indian Ocean. Positioned between the Arabian Peninsula and the Horn of Africa, it's vital for transporting oil and goods, but it's becoming a hotspot for conflict and maritime insecurity. On the other side, the Panama Canal, an economic backbone of the Americas for over a century, is grappling with the devastating effects of drought. A climate crisis is threatening to cripple one of the world's most vital trade routes and challenge the logistics that sustain international commerce. How are these crises connected? And what's at stake for the future of global trade routes? While the Bab al-Mandeb Strait faces geopolitical tensions threatening maritime security, thousands of miles away, the Panama Canal confronts a completely different yet equally alarming crisis: climate change. The Panama Canal, one of the world's most strategic trade routes, is reeling from the devastating effects of an extreme drought, worsened by climate change. In 2023, Panama recorded its lowest rainfall levels ever, jeopardizing the reservoirs that keep the canal operational. These reservoirs, like Gatun and Alajuela lakes, are essential for vessel transit, as each crossing requires millions of gallons of fresh water. With lake levels plummeting, authorities have had to restrict the number of daily crossings, causing backlogs of ships and delays that are already disrupting global logistics. Beyond being a cornerstone of international trade, accounting for roughly 5% of global goods, the canal is also a source of national pride and crucial to Panama's economy. However, this climate crisis threatens not just the canal's viability but also the country's economic stability and the balance of global supply chains. The water crisis affecting the Panama Canal isn't just a technical challenge. It's a stark reminder of its dependence on freshwater resources. Each ship crossing consumes about 52 million gallons of fresh water, drawn directly from Alajuela and Gatun lakes, which serve as natural reservoirs for the canal. Under normal conditions, these lakes are replenished by the abundant rainfall typical of Panama's tropical climate. However, severe droughts in recent years, such as the one in 2023, have drastically reduced precipitation, disrupting the lake's balance. This impacts not only the canal's operations but also the potable water supply for millions of people who depend on these same resources. This interdependence between the canal and the local population creates a critical dilemma. Prioritize the operation of a vital infrastructure for global trade or ensure access to drinking water for the population. With reservoir levels declining, the country faces growing pressure to find solutions that reconcile these two essential needs. The increasing reliance on water resources and the restrictions on the Panama Canal's operations are already causing significant impacts on the global economy. With the number of daily crossings reduced, the waiting time to pass through the canal can reach up to 23 days, directly affecting maritime transport costs and creating bottlenecks in supply chains. Around 5% of global trade passes through this strategic route, and delays of this magnitude have immediate consequences for the prices of basic goods, fuel, and consumer products. Shipping companies are being forced to seek alternatives, facing additional costs that are inevitably passed on to the end consumer. For Panama, the economic losses due to reduced vessel traffic and increased criticism of the canal's efficiency represent yet another blow to its strategic relevance. At the same time, the geopolitical importance of the canal is coming under scrutiny. Major powers like the United States and China, which heavily depend on this route to maintain their trade flows, are closely monitoring the situation, while competitors seek alternative routes to reduce their reliance on Panama. This crisis also highlights the fragility of global infrastructure in the face of challenges like climate change and geopolitical disputes. As trade routes are reassessed and pressure on the canal mounts, the question arises: who will seize this instability to gain a strategic advantage? With the crisis at the Panama Canal directly affecting global trade, several alternatives are being considered to reduce dependence on this historic route. Each of these proposals reflects not only the search for logistical solutions, but also the geopolitical rivalries and economic interests of different nations. One of the most debated alternatives is the Bioceanic Corridor in South America, which would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans via highways and railways, crossing countries like Brazil, Paraguay, Argentina, and Chile. This route is already under development and has the potential to transform the transportation of goods, especially agricultural products and the growing lithium mining sector. Another proposal is the Colombian Rail Corridor, which plans to connect the Caribbean to the Pacific through an extensive railway network. This project would not only create an alternative route for international transport, but also strengthen Colombia's position as a key commercial hub in the region. There is also the ambitious plan to construct a canal in Nicaragua, which would serve as a direct alternative to the Panama Canal. Despite being an old idea, the project remains stagnant due to financial challenges and political instability in the country. Finally, Mexico is betting on the Interoceanic Corridor, a project to modernize an old railway line that links the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. With support from international investors, this route promises to be a faster and more efficient solution to growing commercial demands. With each of these initiatives, the future of global trade routes could become more diversified. However, none of these alternatives will be implemented without significant challenges, whether economic, environmental, or political. While alternatives begin to emerge, the crisis at the Panama Canal exposes a long-term problem that cannot be ignored: the growing vulnerability of global infrastructure to climate change. The drought affecting the canal's reservoirs is just one example of how extreme events are challenging structures once considered unshakable. The canal's administration is already studying measures to mitigate the impact of climate change and ensure the sustainability of its operations. Proposed solutions include creating new reservoirs and building diversion channels that could redirect water from other rivers to Gatun and Alajuela lakes. However, these solutions require billions in investments and face environmental challenges, as constructing large reservoirs could displace local communities and alter sensitive ecosystems. In addition, Panama faces the daunting task of balancing water use between the canal's needs and the population's supply. With extreme weather events becoming increasingly frequent, maintaining this balance will be one of the country's greatest challenges in the coming decades. The crisis at the Panama Canal is not occurring in isolation. When combined with other threats to trade routes, such as insecurity in the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, the global impact multiplies. Ships are being rerouted, prolonged delays are occurring, and additional costs are triggering a chain reaction across the global economy. One of the most visible effects of this crisis is the rising cost of maritime transportation. Shipping companies, facing delays of up to 23 days at the Panama Canal, are opting for alternative routes, such as the long journey around the Cape of Good Hope in Africa. This decision, while necessary to maintain the flow of goods, can increase operational costs by up to 30%, depending on the route and type of cargo. Consequently, these additional costs are passed on to the consumer, already leading to higher prices for basic and manufactured goods. Products like fuel, food, and electronics are among the most affected. Importing countries, especially those dependent on fast and efficient routes to receive supplies, are facing price hikes that further strain inflation rates. This is particularly critical in developing economies, where much of the population is already grappling with high living costs. Beyond the economic impacts, The crisis at the Panama Canal also reveals a structural fragility in global supply chains. The heavy reliance on fixed routes such as the Panama Canal and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait leaves global trade vulnerable to external events, whether climate-related, as seen in Panama, or geopolitical, as in the Horn of Africa. With both routes facing simultaneous challenges, the security and efficiency of global trade are being put to the test. Major economic powers like the United States, China, and the European Union are already feeling the effects. Multinational companies that rely on fast maritime transport are re-evaluating their logistical strategies, aiming to diversify their routes and invest in alternatives like regional hubs or intermodal transport systems. However, creating such alternatives requires significant time and investment, meaning the effects of the Panama Canal crisis on global trade could linger for months, if not years. Moreover, the geopolitical consequences of this crisis are inevitable. Trade tensions among major powers could escalate as they seek independent solutions, while smaller countries whose economies are directly tied to these routes face additional challenges in maintaining their competitiveness in the global market. The crisis at the Panama Canal exposes a risk that goes beyond logistical delays and immediate economic impacts. It directly threatens the strategic position the canal has held for over a century. At a time when reliance on traditional maritime routes is being questioned, the canal is facing a challenging scenario, not only due to climate change but also because of the rise of alternatives that could redefine global trade. Many people don't know, but the history of the Panama Canal began in the late 19th century, when the idea of connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through an artificial canal across the Isthmus of Panama was first proposed. Initially, the project was undertaken by a French company led by Ferdinand de Lesseps, the same engineer behind the successful Suez Canal. However, the mountainous terrain, tropical climate, and diseases like malaria and yellow fever caused the French project to collapse in 1889, leaving thousands of workers dead and the infrastructure incomplete. In 1904, the United States took over the project after negotiating with Panama, which had recently gained independence from Colombia. Under the leadership of engineer John Frank Stevens, and later George Washington Goethals, the project was completely redesigned. Instead of a sea-level canal, a system of locks was chosen to raise and lower ships using massive water reservoirs. This approach utilized the area's natural resources, such as the Chagres River, and resolved many of the issues that had doomed the French effort. The construction of the canal was a monumental challenge, involving the excavation of millions of tons of earth and rock, the construction of dams like Gatun Dam to create what was then the world's largest artificial lake, and the installation of a sophisticated lock system. Moreover, the United States implemented advanced health measures under the guidance of Dr. William C. Gorgas, who eradicated the tropical diseases that had devastated French workers. This medical effort not only saved thousands of lives but also accelerated the pace of construction. Finally, the canal was inaugurated on August 15, 1914, after a decade of intense work involving more than 75,000 workers from around the globe. Spanning approximately 80 kilometers, the Panama Canal revolutionized global trade by dramatically shortening maritime routes between the oceans. Its construction not only marked an engineering milestone but also established Panama as a key strategic hub for international trade and global geopolitics. Historically, the Panama Canal was a landmark of innovation, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in one of the most efficient maritime crossings in the world. However, delays caused by drought and operational restrictions are eroding this perception of efficiency. Countries and companies that once relied exclusively on the canal are now considering other options, such as land routes, railways, and even expanding ports capable of accommodating ships that do not need the canal to access global markets. Among these initiatives, the Bioceanic Corridor in South America and the Interoceanic Corridor in Mexico stand out. Yet, an even more significant factor is the emergence of new centers of economic and logistical power, such as China, which is investing heavily in alternative infrastructure to secure its supply chains. These moves not only challenge the Panama Canal's hegemony but also reshape the geopolitical landscape by decentralizing global trade and opening up new routes less vulnerable to climate or political crises. For Panama, this represents a strategic dilemma. The canal's relevance depends on two fundamental factors: its ability to maintain efficient operations under any conditions and its capacity to remain competitive in the face of growing alternatives. The 2016 expansion was a step in the right direction, but the current crisis shows that physical modernization alone is not enough. It's essential to ensure environmental, technological, and even diplomatic resilience for the canal to remain the preferred choice of the world's largest trade players. The Panama Canal has reached a turning point that could define its role in global trade for decades to come. More than just a masterpiece of engineering, it symbolizes humanity's ability to connect continents, accelerate economic progress, and transform geography into opportunity. But now the pressing question is, how can a canal created in the early 20th century survive the challenges of a constantly changing world? The impacts of climate change have ushered in a new reality. With reservoirs at critical levels, Panama must act quickly to ensure the canal's continued operation. Building new reservoirs, redirecting rivers, and adopting technologies to reduce water consumption are only part of the solution. The real challenge lies in adapting to a future where nothing is guaranteed, not the climate, nor the canal's position as the preferred route for global trade. Meanwhile, competition is intensifying. Alternative routes are emerging in all directions, each promising less reliance on a canal now mired in uncertainty. What does this mean for global trade? And more importantly, what does it mean for Panama, whose economy and geopolitical relevance are directly tied to this historic infrastructure? The future of the Panama Canal will not be determined solely by engineering or investments. It will be shaped by Panama's ability to balance efficiency, sustainability, and diplomacy in a world where climate change and geopolitical competition dictate the rules of the game. The question isn't just whether the canal will survive, but whether it can reinvent itself to remain indispensable in the 21st century. The Panama Canal's history has always been one of overcoming obstacles, and now, once again, it faces a challenge that will test the limits of human innovation and resilience. What's at stake isn't just a maritime route but the very connection of the world as we know it. Will the Panama Canal continue to serve as the vital link between oceans and nations, or will it be replaced by new alternatives? Only time will tell.